entanglement earlier. The strange thing about quantum entanglement is that it's supposed to be able to happen at an absolute instant, or faster than light, but it seems like it's described as instantaneously. If you have a particle at one end of the universe and a particle at another end, when you make a change to one, instantaneously, no time at all passes, instantaneously the change happens in the other one. And with something that is, I'm curious what you guys think, how that fits in with an electric universe model, but also how quantum entanglement is being utilized in things like quantum computing and things like that.
Oh, man, that's a big issue. But Anthony, you should go ahead. This is not my area.
Well, when we talk about vast distances and two particles that are connected through quantum entanglement, I almost want to lean towards the direction of taking time out of the discussion entirely. Mm-hmm. I think that they're operating not just at a speed that is faster than the speed of light, thus violating the theory of relativity, and Einstein saying that nothing can move faster than the speed of light. And I'm being very paraphrased with that. I think you have to be talking about instantaneous states. In other words, there is no time reference that's necessary when you're describing that communication that's taking place between two quantum entangled particles. They're behaving simultaneously because there is no time in this equation. They're just happening. They're just behaving in an identical fashion at the same moment without time even being a limiting factor or even a defining factor.
Even though they're located at, let's say, in this discussion, at opposite ends of the universe, that neither time nor space really is relevant?
Exactly, because the only reason that time is relevant is because we're human beings. Mm-hmm. Now, we said earlier, you cannot separate the physical from the spiritual and vice versa. Mm-hmm. Many people have discussed the theory or the idea that spiritual beings operate in an existence in which time is irrelevant. When we talk about God and time, from a Christian point of view, certainly from God's perspective, time is irrelevant. The only reason it becomes relevant is because we're mere mortals, and we operate in a physical realm, and that requires us to have some form of point of reference. It just happens to be time, but it really is irrelevant in the greater scheme of the universe.
Talk for a moment about the concept of angels and demons, of the existence of these types of realities and other entities. We know that in effect, the conspiracy theory behind CERN is that we're trying to create a pathway, an open doorway to these entities. Does that suggest that existence exists in these other dimensions? And I guess it just raises all kinds of interesting questions. The concept of sort of, I guess, non-locality, the idea that these two particles can be connected without time or space, sort of makes you wonder if there really is any way that we can talk about that concept and at the same time talk about this other dimension in which there seem to be entities that we can come into contact with, and that they come in contact with us, usually not for our benefit.
Well, I think we can use a tool to really make that tangible for people, and that's the quantum computer. Now, there's a lot that we can say about the quantum computer in terms of the specific one that I'm talking about utilizes quantum bits or qubits in replacing transistors. So we have to define a quantum computer. In this case, it's a qubit-based computer. Now, how that operates, there are multiple points of discussion on the mechanics of it, but to go to your point of non-locality and instantaneous behavior of two identical particles at a distance, as well as entities or spirits in another dimension, let's define dimension in terms of how this computer operates. Think of an oscilloscope, and on the screen you have a waveform. You have a peak. So at the base you have a wide base, at the top you have a point. you have a wave, a spike that goes up and goes down. In the quantum world, there's a thing called quantum tunneling, in which in our dimension, we are able to send a signal. Let's call it a quantum particle, just for the sake of discussion. A quantum particle in our dimension is sent through the base of that spike. It does that by tunneling through, rather than going all the way to the top of the spike and then back over the top and down to the other side into the other dimension. It takes a shortcut. It's kind of the brute force approach to communicating with another dimension through quantum tunneling, in which this quantum particle moves through the base of that spike into that other dimension, to the other side of that spike. That's how the quantum computer, the adiabatic quantum computer, operates. This is also what the Large Hadron Collider is attempting to do in the realm of the Higgs field. If we're going to appreciate or accept the description or definition of a field as being a Higgs field, it is actually tunneling through that Higgs field to another dimension to establish that line of communication. You need that open doorway, you need that open line of communication, that tunneling, to be constant, to be fixed. When you're using a quantum computer, you're using very short periods of time in which the tunneling takes place. It is extracting the solution to a problem, to a combinatorial equation, obtaining that solution from the other dimension, the other side, and then that extraction takes place through the reverse quantum tunneling, through that spike, in other words, the dimensional barrier, and that equation, the solution to it, returns to us in our dimension. At the quantum level, that computer is operating identically to how the Large Hadron Collider is attempting to operate at a macro scale to establish a fixed tunneling or portal process of two-way communication. So you have now the ability, utilizing the machine, to communicate to the spiritual world, which is on the other side of that spike, that barrier between the dimensions, that ability to fix with a machine an open tunnel.
Wow. Yeah, and that doesn't sound good at all.
Doesn't sound wise.
No. So what kinds of things would be possible with a machine like that, like with a quantum computer? And like if like say if like our government developed something like that, or just for sake of conversation, what could actually be? Are there any limits to what could be achieved with that type of technology?
I'm sure there are limits, but in between here and the limits is an entirely different way of looking at life. Now, I'm going to start off with talking about Hawking again, Stephen Hawking, because he said, you do not want to communicate with these entities. He called them entities. You do not want to open that doorway because you're not going to like what comes through. Now, this comes from an avowed atheist. So even he is very afraid of what is going on with this machine. Now, in terms of the computer itself, when I say machine, I'm talking about the LHC. But in terms of the adiabatic quantum computer, this is connected with what's going on at CERN. The two work in tandem together. Now, you will not find that in the public realm, but those two are operating. The purpose of that machine being connected with the LHC is for the establishment and maintenance of that portal that I described. Now, the machine itself, a little bit of background. The first model was the 128. That was purchased by Lockheed in conjunction with USC. They have an adiabatic quantum computer there. They have a quantum computer lab there. It's all public information. 128 to the Model 512 to the Model 124, or excuse me, the 1024, and now released in February, the 2048. Now that number is critical to understand, the 2048. That comes from Shor's algorithm. This is a algorithm. This is a series of numbers, covers a full sheet of paper, if you will, that was developed by developed by Shor, Dr. Shor. He said it would take a quantum computer to develop or to solve his algorithm. And the purpose of this, solving it, was to find all the prime numbers, the prime factors of this. He said that no existing transistor-based computer could solve the 2048 Shor's algorithm. That was long before the adiabatic quantum computer was ever conceived. The first model of that computer was able to solve the 2048 algorithm. The reason that that's important is that goes to encryption, data encryption, communication, secure communication. With Shor's algorithm, you can crack every form of encryption that exists today. So there are no secure lines or forms of communication on the planet. Utilizing this computer, you can crack every code out there because they're now obsolete in the face of the 2048 algorithm. If you have this quantum computer, which is utilizing the 2048 algorithm, you can create your own language, your own form of encryption. You now have absolute secure lines of communication that no other computer in the world can crack.
Let me insert a question then. That's
Sure.
incredible. I have a bit of a computer background, having worked with some of those big names like Microsoft and Oracle and so forth. So the idea, I guess, really is who is going to have these computers? Does anyone that contributes to CERN, is it going to have an adiabatic computer? Is that what you called it?
Right.
Yeah, adiabatic. That's I gotta practice that and make sure I've got that right.
Without heat transfer or heat resistance.
Okay, and so this sounds like a tool of the elites that only the elite will have, but basically all bona fide governments might have these computers, but the ISISes of the world, or the Christian Church or whatever, won't have these computers. So
Right.
that everything is open to to the governments, to the all-seeing eye. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. I have said many times, this computer is the beast system that we see in Revelation. This is a system that will enable the one world government, the one world religion, and the ability to track every person who takes the mark of the beast. And that's a whole other discussion, the mark of the beast. But this computer has the equivalent processing power. The 2048 that came out in February has the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains. Now, we can't even wrap our heads around what that really means. But the point is, I'll give you an example. The Tianyi-2 in China, at the time was the fastest quantum computer on the planet, or supercomputer, I should say, on the planet. And this goes back to the 512 model. But at the time, they did a little test, and they put forth a problem to the Tianyi-2 that took that computer 30 minutes to arrive at a solution. It took 10 seconds for the adiabatic quantum computer, and that was the 512 model. We're now at the 2048 model. So we really don't have the ability to appreciate the processing power, but also what the capabilities are. This is an interdimensional functioning computer. When I say that this changes life, this changes how we perceive life, even how we perceive time, this is what I'm referring to. And that's why this computer is tied with the agenda of opening a portal, because it operates in an interdimensional mechanism in a fashion, the same thing as what they're trying to achieve with the LHC. So this changes everything. And from a standpoint of prophecy, this is the machine that enables prophecy in Revelation to unfold before our eyes.
I certainly could see how it would have the processing power to achieve that. I think there's no question about that. I remember hearing a lecture not that far ago, not that long ago, from a person from Microsoft Research that was talking about quantum computing and talking about certain kinds of processes or problems that could be, that would take perhaps perhaps thousands of years for a digital computer to solve, can be solved in seconds with a quantum computer. And of
Correct.
course that is truly mind-boggling. I guess a question I'd throw out is to what extent will the quantum computer and what you're talking about really have an implication? Does it have the ability to manipulate things back in our sort of simple 3 or 4-dimensional world, or is it off in its own world by itself, and never the twain shall meet?
Well, it will always operate in our frame of reference, but it will, excuse me, because it communicates, let's just say it communicates with the other side. It is obtaining answers to combinatorial problems from another dimension. So if you really want to take this to a spiritual aspect, it's communicating with entities. So like the headset that you're wearing right now, that's the adiabatic quantum computer with the other dimensions. So communication is taking place already.
Wow. Do you think that quantum computing might be the, well, we'll just say from Revelation 9, the key to the abyss? And do things like artificial intelligence have anything to do with this as well?
Absolutely. Back in 2010, the manufacturer, and I got in trouble for mentioning the manufacturer's name, but you can certainly find it if you Google adiabatic quantum computer. But in their press release in 2010, they said that in early 2015, they would be releasing a computer that had the processing equivalency of 7 billion human brains, and they said it would be artificially intelligent. Now, in February, when they presented their press release on the Model 2048, they said, 7 billion human brains, but they did not mention AI. This is, in the present time, an active artificially intelligent computer, and we can define what artificial intelligence means, but it is a thinking machine. It is a self-learning machine. Its basis for artificial intelligence, to make it very short and succinct here, is human behavior, modeling of human behavior. The first reason for developing this computer and the cracking of the 2048 algorithm was for predictive modeling of human behavior as well as the physical environmental behavior. In other words, what was happening on one side of the planet having an effect on the other side. What were the ripple effects? What was the butterfly effect? If something happened here, and how would it affect the other side of the planet? They initially tested that theory of human behavior predictive modeling by tapping into the markets, the stock markets and the commodity trades. And they were actually able to predict what would happen in the markets and take market advantage. This is something that Dr. Farrell has mentioned, and we talked about this in our private conversation last week, the interruption of trades and taking advantage and taking profit in a black budget operating mechanism. This is what this computer does. It generates profits for the black world by interrupting trades.
We might just explain that might just explain what we're saying to the listeners, because they weren't part of that conversation, that the idea that so much of what is going on in science, the secret space program, what's happening at CERN, where does all the money come from to fund all this? In effect, it's called the black budget, and what you've thrown out there, which I assume Joseph Farrell is asserted as well, is that this cadre of folks, they sort of tap in, in a microsecond, a nanosecond into the markets, manipulate the markets, take profit, and you might see it as almost like a tax on the world system to fund the research that they're doing on behalf of all of humanity, which I say that tongue-in-cheek, of course.
Right.
So that is, of course, that's mind-boggling, and you talk about the ultimate conspiracy theory. Boy, that is a grand conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
So,
so you have unlimited funds to do whatever you choose to do. Now, this computer, not just directed with the LHC, and we talk about portals and all of that, but let's get back to the discussion of the Book of Revelation and the Mark of the Beast, because this now has the ability to simultaneously and instantaneously track every individual who takes the Mark of the Beast. In past years, people have thought, gee, how could you have a computer system that could track everybody, their behavior, their decision-making processes, everything that they're communicating? How could you have a computer that would know all and be all? Well, we have that computer. Because with the Mark of the Beast, not only will everyone be tracked, and we always hear in Scripture about you won't be able to buy or sell. The transactions will be prevented if you don't take the Mark of the Beast. Well, if you have everything in the world being processed through a quantum computer, all of the information in the world being real-time accessed by this computer, and therefore everything being tracked, then you have the ability to fulfill what Revelation is talking about. But let's go beyond that a step and go back to what I mentioned, and that's predictive human behavior, the modeling of human behavior. In other words, predicting the future. What is going to happen tomorrow, a week from now, a year from now? All of this modeling is the core of the processing of this computer. When we talk about artificial intelligence, a big slice of that definition of AI is predicting the future. Specifically, what will humans do? If you do this to this group, what does it do to the rest of the world? If you do this to an individual, what does it do to all the individuals in the world? So it's not just tracking, not just buying and selling. It's predicting the future and taking advantage of that, knowing the future.
It definitely sounds like the Minority Report, the movie The Minority Report. Sure. It's like arresting Josh for doing something that Josh will do but hasn't done yet.
And that he doesn't even know he's going to do.
Yeah, that's not good news.
Is there do you think there's a connection between artificial intelligence and the image of the beast?
Certainly. When we talk about the image of the beast, we're talking about the creation